Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of MTE's Mobile Education, powered by the Rag Company. We have live education every Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern, and of course we couldn't do it without the Rag Company's help. Today, we have Keith Duplessie going to be telling us about how you should equip your shop right. So Keith, I'm going to bring you in here. Thanks for joining us
good
today.
evening. Hey, great to be here. Thanks for having me on.
All right, I'm going to take myself out and you have at it.
All right. Hey, well, welcome to the MTE Education Series. As Sheldon said, it's a privilege to be here and an honor to be here. So you're looking at my table here and I got all sorts of toys and things. We are not actually going to talk about really any of these things. These are what I call tools. So when we talk about equipping your shop and equipment, we're really talking about the big stuff. And so that's going to really pare down what we talk about today. And really all this stuff is great props and it's table covering. So with that said, let's talk about what we are going to discuss today. Shop equipment and how do you get from where you are now to where you really should or need to be. So first thing you want to do in, considering the factors of a shop equipping is a needs assessment. The next thing is a budget, and finally is financing. So we're going to talk about those each individually and some of the equipment. All right. So what's a needs assessment? It is literally just what it sounds like. What do I need? And the questions you want to ask are, what do you intend to offer for a service? That's the absolute key to all of this is, what do I need to do in order to provide the services I'm trying to sell? So if you're not cleaning under a vehicle, you don't need to worry about undercarriage washing. But if you are, that's something you have to take into account. Do I get it with a tool or an additional item, or do I do something else? Okay. Let's say you're doing wheel removal. You might need a lift. So we'll talk about those as well. But those are all the things that you want to start thinking about is what am I trying to offer? And then what does it take to most efficiently do that? So again, this comes down to the second factor of a needs assessment, which is what is the demand on the shop? What's the volume? How many of these vehicles are you going to do? Are you going to take the wheels off of, say, one vehicle per month? Maybe you don't need a lift. Do you have employees? Don't you have employees? Safety factors come into play there. So those are part of your assessment. Not only what am I doing, but how often am I doing it? What's my volume? And then who's doing the service? Is it an employee or is it myself? And finally, what does your facility or your space afford you to do? As you can see, I'm at the Rag Company. So I am in their detail training and education studio. I got all the space in the world. Right now, there are 2 cars in the shop, and I have seen as many as 7 or 8 in here. So, plenty of space, lots of area to work in, designated spaces, and that kind of stuff. So that's a question you've also got to answer. Am I in a single, use space, or am I in a multi-use space? Right now, you can see I'm actually in the wash bay. Above me is the pressure washer boom, and I got a water containment mat under me. If this is your only space, this is your wash bay and your detail bay and your coating bay. And so doing different things in here will have different set of demands on what you can or can't put in the shop and what kind of equipment you want to have. Okay. So we've done a needs assessment. We decided, hey, here's what we need. But that doesn't do you any good if you don't have a budget. So how much money do I have to spend is always kind of the easy question, right? Is it more than the cost of the equipment? Yeah, that's another simple question to answer. And then how do I spend my budget? A lot of the things that we're going to talk about may be all at once purchasing, or they may be over time purchasing. So what are the key components that I need right now? And when you do your needs assessment and you do your budget, what you're looking at is what are the things that are the most commonly used items in my shop that I'm going to use for every detail. One of those is really simple. It's a pressure washer. We wash cars, and for the most part, before we detail them. So if that's what you're doing, maybe number 1 on your list of items that you have to budget first is a pressure washer. Sometimes you need more things than that. Sometimes you need multiple items. So that takes us to the next part of that, which is kind of financing. So how do I spend my budget? What do I spend it on? And then where do I spend from? So one of the things we talk a lot about in the industry today, from my end, is on equipment. How do I pay for all this stuff? Now, most people, they reach into the pocket, they grab the credit card and they zap it, or they wait till they have enough cash on hand. But there are a ton of options out there. Money has never been cheaper than it is today. And a lot of people may hear that and not understand what that means. It means that you can get a loan for just about everything in your shop. And there are a lot of finance companies out there. And in some cases, some of your equipment manufacturers, I'm one of them, I have a finance guy that I can refer you to if you're looking to finance equipment. Cool part about that is you can amortize it over time. You can write off the payment versus writing off the entire purchase in a calendar year. So it really depends. In that first year, you're probably closer to breaking even than hopefully you ever will be, and you're taking off. So it may not be worth it to you to try and write off the entire value of all your purchase in that first year. Maybe it makes more sense to purchase the bulk of your items on a financing plan. That's a 3-5 year loan, whatever it is, a lease program, and write it off over time because there's more tax benefit. You'll have to decide that for yourself, but it's something you want to think about, okay? Here's another thing. We have built-in equipment here. We have some really nice built-in equipment here. The challenge for you is if you don't own your building, you need to look at your lease or your rental agreement and see what it says that you're on the hook for. Sometimes when you make an improvement to the building and adding built-in equipment can be that equipment now becomes part of the building and you got to leave it behind. Now, one of the biggest things that we talk about in that arena is a large air compressor where you plumb in compressed air. All of a sudden that infrastructure now can potentially, depending on your lease, become part of the building assets, and you have to leave it when you go. So look at those things. If you own the building, do whatever you want. You've got some leeway and some space to work in there, okay? And then are you buying your next equipment now? So, you want to look at what you're doing every day in your business operations, and somewhere in there should be a consistently built-in amount of money that comes out of every job, whether it's $1, $5, whatever it is, 3%, some other number that you set aside for future equipment. Now that can be future tools, it can be future equipment. It can also be replacement tools and equipment. So if you are factoring in those components into your budget every month of what you're making in revenue and setting that aside as a cash reserve, I really encourage you to do that. Part of infrastructural growth in an organization is planning for growth by setting aside at least some cash. Some people call it a rainy day fund. I think that's a different item. I think you should have a rainy day fund, and you should also have a separate amount of money set aside to buy, uprate, or upgrade shop equipment. So, and the shop in general. Another component that goes with those built-in things that we didn't talk about, but we will, lighting. You put new lighting in, sometimes that becomes part of the building and you're on the hook for it. All right, so let's talk. What are the toys? These are tools, but what are we going to look at today? We're going to start with the biggest and most common pieces of equipment. I have more things than what's on this slide to talk about, but we're going to try in an hour to get all of these, and then I'll throw in some Easter eggs in there for other things that are not on this list. So let's dive right into pressure washers. Pressure washers vary from everything from a portable unit to a portable heated unit, gas, electric, what's right for me. So, things to think about when you look at a pressure washer. First, if you can build it in and you can do electric, that is the absolute winner way to go. Because over time, the durability, the quality of the unit are going to be more affordable, both in replacement cost and consistency of replacement, but also in repair, maintenance, and overall length of the tool. So a gas pressure washer, there are a number of them. Let's talk about gas first, because they're kind of the most common that everybody buys. A lot of us just start out with whatever gas pressure washer we can afford. We go to Harbor Freight, we go to Home Depot, we go to the home center, and we buy a unit. Most everything you find at those stores is what we call a consumer grade product. Great tool, good for Saturday and Sunday. Pressure wash the driveway a couple times a year. Do the sidewalks. You can use it to wash the car, but it's an occasional use item. If you use those for professional purposes, what you're going to find is that you'll burn them up faster than you would for getting a really industrial piece of equipment that's built for the job of everyday use, consistently using it all day. And that's going to wear out faster. So while it sounds like a better deal to spend $375 or $400 on a lower grade unit like that versus necessarily buying, say, the $1,200 or $1,500 built-in unit that you can wall mount or mount somewhere and has on-demand pressure and has to be wired in or runs off a 30-amp circuit, in the long run, you will actually probably spend more replacing the lesser piece of equipment over time. And when I say lesser, I don't mean that it's not a good quality piece of equipment. I just mean it's not built for what our purposes are as a detailer. So when possible, buy things that are infrastructurally going to last you longer and give you more durability, less maintenance, and that kind of stuff. Now, considerations. Water feed. Water feed's the first thing that we always look at. If you're mobile, please listen to this. You need to feed your pump with a certain volume of water at a certain pressure in order for that pressure washer to both work maximally at its PSI rating, but also at its use rate. So there are two ratings on a pressure washer. It's pressure and it's gallons per minute. Most pressure washers will run anywhere between 1 gallon per minute all the way up to 6 or 8 gallons per minute on the more professional, higher grade products. Now, that doesn't mean they always have to run that. There's some ways we can manage that, and I'll tell you about those in a second. But the main thing with that is that you have a volume of water you have to move and feed it with, and then you also have a pressure that it does for an output. You won't get the pressure if you don't have the volume of feed into the unit. So if you've got a 100-gallon tank and you have a pressure washer that eats 6 gallons per minute, and you spray that thing for 4 or 5 minutes to rinse and prep your car, you can do the math. 5 times 8 is 40. You just went through almost half of your water supply for the day. So your gallon per minute use is really going to be a big thing if you are a mobile guy. If you're not, the main thing is, you want to make sure you feed it. Because if you don't feed it the volume it needs, what happens? You starve the pump, and that causes cavitation. It causes it to pulse. And when it does that, it's actually damaging your pressure rings and your pump O-rings. So you want to make sure you feed it with the right amount of water. Usually if you're in a shop, you're on city water, you're fine. If you're on well water, you have a different animal. So again, make sure you're getting the right amount of feed to your pump, and make sure that you understand that the pump itself needs to be fed both with a volume of water and a back pressure on it. So this unit here is actually an on-demand unit, but it requires a certain amount of back pressure out of the line, which normally is about 30 to 40 PSI, and most street pressure at your houses is that, in order for when you pull the trigger for the reed switch to get pushed forward and activate an auto start and stop the unit. So other factors to consider. Always ask about these things when you're buying a new piece of equipment. Volume is cool, but I'm one of those guys who actually takes my pressure washers and I put a smaller nozzle tip on them for the flow rate. So I put my nozzle tip in there that gives me anywhere between a half to 1 gallon per minute flow. So even though the pump and the pressure washer can handle 6 gallons per minute, I'm running less water. The other thing is the fan width on your pressure washer tip. I like to be between 15 and 40 degrees. 25 degrees is my perfect pressure washer tip fan. It gives me enough width that I can knock stuff off the vehicle quickly, soap and whatnot, but it also gives me a little bit of breadth so that I'm not working on a little tiny strip on the side of the car. Pressure. Let's talk about the pressure. Don't care what pressure your unit can run at. You really don't want much more than 1500 PSI when pressure washing a car. Why? You can remove paint that way. And you can remove it pretty easily when you get up close to the paint. So 1500 is kind of the limit. I like to set mine for my customers at between 12 and 1400 PSI. It's a very safe pressure. It's still effective, and with a low ratio nozzle for GPM, I can get plenty of pressure and I can knock all the dirt, the mud, the junk off the car. So something to think about. The wash bay in general. I am standing on what looks like a beautiful gray floor. I'm actually standing on a water containment mat. So if you have the ability as a fixed location to have floor drains that go to your sanitary sewer or water separator, you're good to go. You can wash cars inside. If you don't, and your shop floods every time that you do a detail because the water has nowhere to go or it runs all over the shop, then a water containment mat is perfect for you. These typically have 3 to 4 inch berms. The blue walls that you see along the wall over there, those are berms. They hold the water in. And then we just have a scupper pump that we suck out the water with, send it into our sanitary drain, and we're good to go. If you're mobile, can't say this enough. EPA requirements are that you reclaim, recover, or divert your water from any rainwater runoff system. In other words, it can't go down the street drain. You could run it onto a private property piece of grass and whatnot if you're doing washing in a driveway. But if you're in a public space or you're on the public street, by code, by EPA requirements, you got to recover your water or make sure it does not, or make sure it does divert or doesn't go down the storm drains, the waterways. So you should invest in a water containment mat or a boom system. Either of those are acceptable ways to reclaim your water. And you can just use a shop vac type vac like the one next to me here to recover your water if you're a mobile guy. But you're really obligated to do that. So, and that stuff you can discharge at any place that has a sanitary sewer discharge, like an RV park. You have to pay for it, but it's complying with the law and it's doing the right thing. And if you were truly being honest about being professionals, doing the right thing is part of the game here. Let's talk about cool infrastructure things here. This has a swivel boom over my head. You can't really see it, but if you look at my slide, you can see an outside arch with a swivel boom in it. Those are great. I can get all the way around the vehicle. My hose never drags on the ground. So another great way to manage my pressure washers. Want to talk about heat real quick and then we'll move on. Heat is one of the 5 factors of cleaning and it is a key component, but it's not a required component necessarily when it comes to washing vehicles. It certainly aids in the colder weather or with the dirtier, grimier, or greasier vehicles. And there's no denying that. But you can also clean just as well with a regular cold water pressure washer. My recommendation is that if you get a heat or a hot water system, get one that is built as a complete system. So don't go and just get a pressure washer and then decide to hook the hot water line up from the building to it. Make sure that that pump is heat rated, so it's designed to have high heat run through it or hot water. If you don't, you may basically warp or damage your ceramic seals inside the pressure washer piston pump, and then that's going to wreck your pressure washer and you've done damage. So heat is definitely a factor, but it's not necessarily a must unless you're really cleaning super greasy and damaged, dirty vehicles. Most of us, the chemicals we use are all designed for cold water cleaning. So while it's a great factor to have and a nice tool to have, sometimes just having water that's not, super cold is enough. So something to think about when we talk about pressure washers. All right. We could talk about pressure washers all day. I could do a whole webinar on those. We're going to move on here real quick. And price is a factor. What should I spend on a pressure washer? Really depends on what you're going to use it for, how long you're going to use it, and how much you're going to use it. You can get pressure washers that have dual nozzle capability. If you wash a lot of cars, you're doing high volume, and you got 2 bays, you can get 1 unit for about 50 or 45% more in expense than buying 2 single units. So again, consulting with somebody who really knows what they're doing when it comes to pressure washers can save you some money, but it can also really make your operation extremely efficient. All right, let's talk about air compressors, because air compressors are a big thing. Air compressors, there's really a number of them out there. And again, this goes back to those factors we talked about when selecting equipment. What am I using this for? Am I just blowing dust out of the car and I use it for a few minutes or 30 or 40 seconds? Am I using a Tornador and consistently using that for a car for 30 or 40 minutes? Am I using air tools? Right here. Excuse me. If I'm using air tools, then I got to really feed the beast. So they require a lot of volume. So we talk about air compressors. Again, what's the intended purpose and what am I using the product for? If I'm just blowing out cars, a small portable event unit may be good. Other factors to consider. If you're in an open shop like this one, hey, Noise travels. So if you can't put it in a separate room, oh, my personal assistant here, thank you very much. If you're putting it into a separate room where you can dampen noise and you can dampen the heat output, that's great. But if you're using it in the open bay, sound certainly becomes an issue in our shops. So all things to consider. My number one factor when I look at an air compressor is what volume is required of the shop in order to operate the shop. So when we talk about volume, we're not talking about pressure, guys. PSI has very little to do with it. We look at what volume of air does a pressure washer produce at 90 PSI. So I'm reading the tool here and it says, hey, operate this tool at 90 PSI. That's great. This is a Rupes, and hey, thanks guys, these are great tools. But if you look at it, it says I need 6.2 bar or 400 liters per minute. That's the volume I need. We're in America, we use SCFM or we use CFM. So, hey Keith, what the heck is that? My answer is you need to do some conversion. I pulled up my chart and 396 liters per minute is basically 14 SCFM. So about 14 and a half, 14 and a quarter cubic feet per minute of air is required. How big an air compressor do I need for that? At least a 5 horse with a 60-gallon tank most times for a piston compressor. If I want to get the air I need to supply a tool like this without it running through my air supply, having to wait for it to recharge and then start over. So airflow really is, again, like pressure washers, about two things. What's my pressure, but also what's my flow? How much volume of air do I need over time? So really important when we pick a pressure washer and really important when we pick a compressor. So back to our compressor conversation. One of the really key things with this is portability. If you guys are a mobile guy, there's probably not many air compressors built out there that are going to support you to use a tool like this. So it kind of comes off the table and you go back to electric tools, which is fine. Then you're using a small compressor to blow out cars and to use it for light cleaning. If you intend to use a Tornador type product, 5.4 SCFM, cubic feet per minute at 90 PSI is generally what that tool eats. So they may have revamped them a little bit, but the last time I checked, that's generally what they eat. So again, that's into a larger compressor with a larger reserve tank. So components of a compressor. First thing is, what is the air compressing element? So you have two kinds. You have a rotary screw, and you can see the picture there in my presentation. That's the one that, if you're looking at it, it's on the right. And then you have a piston compressor. Piston compressors are cheaper, but they are noisier and they are less efficient. So you would need a higher horsepower unit with maybe one more pistons, so 3 pistons, as opposed to a rotary screw, which might use a smaller drive motor, so less power, less horsepower, but provide you with more air, more consistently, and more quietly. It's also going to be more expensive. So things to think about. Oilless, those are really on the smaller units. Bigger, more industrial units generally have an oil system in them, so you do have to check the oil and maintain that. And tank size. Can't say this enough. Air reserve is a huge component of having an air compressor that can provide consistent air pressure. So normally when we get into the big ones, we're talking 100, 120 gallon tanks. You can daisy chain tanks together if you have an old unit where the compressor's gone, but you can still use the tank. The other thing to look at with these things, really important, is making sure you have a tank drain. Oftentimes I get complaints from folks about their air compressor and they say, yeah, it just doesn't provide as much air as it used to. And I go, well, when was the last time you drained the water out of your tank? So on the big units, you can get 5, 10, 15 gallons of water built up in there because the moisture in the air compresses within the compressor and it falls out as separated moisture or water. And that will fill up your tank, reducing your volume and reducing your airflow ability. So make sure that you drain your tank. That'll keep rust and keep debris and moisture out of your lines. It'll also keep your tools running drier, which means they won't freeze up and they won't rust internally. So that's really important. All right, so that's air compressors. Now we're going to go to lights. So the picture you see there of lights or lighting, that's a portable unit. That to me is a tool. But let's talk about lighting in a shop environment. So here we are. For those who've seen the Rag Company, they have the hex panel lighting in here. It's awesome. it provides a lot of light. But light is dependent on a number of factors. So how much light do I need? Sometimes too much light basically washes out what you're trying to look at and you can't see. So on lighter color vehicles, too much light may be a problem. So one of the things I recommend when we talk about lighting is have your light be variable. In other words, a dimmer switch is a positive thing, okay? Secondly, where do I need lights? Do I want them above me? Do I want them at the angle? Do I want them beside me? If you're working on lower parts of the vehicle, it's nice to have light lower. Now you can get light down there without having to mount it on the wall by doing a number of things. Again, overlighting your space with lots of lamps, of bulbs, LED lights is a great way to do that. But you can also do side mount lighting. That's a great way to do it. If you're doing PDR, paintless dent repair, having side light is great because you'll be able to see imperfections in the paint as far as dimples and dents and stuff like that. So all things to consider there. I prefer my light to be from above, and then I'll angle my light from outside the workspace, the designated workspace, at an oblique to get the side panels with good coverage. I don't like light at this level, not so much in the wash bay, but really anywhere. It just has a knack for, the fixture itself, for it collecting stuff on top of it. People run into it, they bang into them, they damage them. If you're using fluorescence like we used to do, they have a chance to break bulbs. It's just not a great way to go. I prefer my light to be up out of the way so people can't run into it or hit it or bang into it. So what is the right kind of light? Light is rated on a number of different things. One of the key components is what we call lumens. But we also have kind of the wavelength. So 7,000 lumens is a brighter, whiter light. 4,000 lumens is going to be a warmer light, more yellow. And then you can have full spectrum lighting that has full UV coverage. You have to decide, what your light is like in your shop. If you have natural light because you have lots of windows, then you may want to go with a brighter, whiter light. If you're looking at having a shop that has a nice even tone to it, maybe something in the 5,000 K range is going to be appropriate for you. A little on the whiter side, but still has a little bit of warmth to it. Again, it won't wash out your color on your vehicles as much when you start working on lighter vehicles. Another factor that goes with that is, where do I hang this stuff? If ceiling height is 20 feet or 22 feet, you've got a lot of calculations to do. If it's, in my case, it's basically at 10 feet or 3 meters, I have a little more flexibility because you don't just have to worry about lumens, you have to worry about a thing called lux. Well, what is lux? I actually have a cheat sheet on this that I keep on my computer. And so lux is a unit of illuminance, or how luminous flux is spread over a given area. So lux is equal to 1 lumen per square meter. So what are we looking at? Well, for example, if you have 1,000 lumen light, most of the time we work with a 5K, but if it's 1 meter from the ground over that square meter below it, it's going to be in the range of 100 lux if you have 1,000 lumen unit. So if you have a 5K, you're going to have 500 lux roughly, okay? What does that really mean? Well, it doesn't mean much until you start doing some calculations. So an example, something with 450 lux that's a meter off the ground, it's going to be 150 lux at the ground floor level. But if it's 2 meters up, it's going to go to a lower level. 3 meters up, lower than that. So 3 meters, a 450 lux unit is going to be at 95 lux, 3 meters from the floor. So 10 feet above me, even though it says it's maybe 5,000 lumens, but at the floor level, again, where I may be working down low, that's going to be roughly, somewhere in the neighborhood of about 300 lux or 300 lumens. Not a great number for me. So my encouragement to you guys is make sure that you are calculating and if you need help with this, please feel free to reach out to me. Calculate your height and distance for your lighting, because if it's way high in the ceiling, you want to get high intensity lights that are designed for high ceilings. And there's some challenges with that kind of stuff, because those lights that are built for high or warehouse style lighting, which are usually 14 to 20 feet high, they have a different kind of dimming system on them. The lights that are for 10 feet or below, you can just put a regular dimmer on the power source and you can dim the lights through the basically the plug. If you have the lights up high, they have a separate voltage setup to control the dimming. So lots of stuff to look at and consider when you're doing high light versus lower lights, when you're doing high intensity, and when you're looking at color. Also, coating guys, I'm talking to you right now. This is really important. Coatings have a tone. Typically, they're either a warm or a cool tone. You want to try and have a light that gives you some balance against that. So if you have a coating that's really, really cool, you want to maybe use a warm tone light so you can see flaws, high spots, modeling, things like that. Conversely, if you have a really warm coating, a brighter, whiter light really does help in showing and highlighting potential high spots and areas that you've missed, and it makes it easier for you to see those things as they flash off. So again, a consideration of the lighting that you want to put in your shop is going to depend on how am I using this lighting and budget. You know, the cool thing about LED lighting and really about any technology is as it develops and it gets older and it's been in the market longer, it gets less expensive. So you can get LED light strips now for a fraction of what they would have cost years ago. I remember lighting my house 7 years ago. I was paying for a light bulb $9 and $10 for an LED light bulb that went in a can light. Today, I can get that same light bulb for about $3.50, $4. So lighting options are much more affordable today than they've ever been. And you want to take a look at that. Final thing on lights, and this is, I think, super important. Portable lighting is perfectly acceptable in a shop where you're using multi-space, setups. If you have a designated coating bay, yeah, build yourself some lighting that's sufficient to work in that particular area. If you're doing interior cleaning, maybe portable light is a better way to go than ceiling mounting something that's really got a ton of brightness and is super expensive, but at the end of the day doesn't accomplish as much as a simple portable light might that's shined into the side door in a much more efficient way. So again, it's all about the look that you're going for, and it's also all about how effective the light is at what you're trying to do in that space. All right, so let's jump ahead here. Lifts. Lifts are one of my great concern areas. I think too often we get into lifts because we want to take wheels and tires and things off of cars, and we want to do cool work. We want to, use them on coating wheels and do stuff like that and clean the wheels, in a very detailed manner. My advice on lifts is pretty simple. You want something that's as dummy proof as you can get it and doesn't expose you to as much risk, if you will. So you can see here I've got two different lifts. I've got a scissor type lift that really is the kind that we typically would use in the detail industry. This is either a hydraulic ram or maybe a screw drive, and it lifts the car up from the rails, and it's a full kind of, if you will, running board style lift. And then you have the standard mechanics lift, which is a post lift. There's a number of factors that go into those. Do we really need to get a vehicle 12 feet or 10 feet in the air with one of those lifts? Are we really working under the undercarriage in that way? Most of the time, no. If you're doing show car detailing, you may have a different animal there. But for the most part, average detailers really don't need a lift like that. So, even things as simple as ramps can sometimes be enough for us to work where we need to work. Paramount to all of this is a lift is better than a jack any day of the week and twice on Sunday. So if you are going to be working under cars, you are going to be taking wheels and tires off of cars, I do recommend you get a lift. So let's talk about those real quickly. Mounting is a key thing. If you put a mechanics lift into a shop, a lot of times they require that you go into the ground with some kind of a well because they have a piston or they have some sort of extension that goes below ground level. So there's some infrastructure that goes with that and expense. Be prepared for that if and when you're looking to buy those things. If you're looking at a scissor lift type thing, those things are designed to be bolted down in a lot of cases. Don't forget to bolt them down. What we don't want to do is put weight on something that has the ability to move on its own power or accidentally move. So everything needs to be bolted down. The other part is if you're bolting things into your floor and if you're putting things on your floor that have a point load, you need to make sure your concrete is designed to handle that. Some of us work in old retail spaces. They're not always designed for high pressure or high weight vehicles to be on them. And that means that they probably don't have the point load in the concrete. You run the potential to crack your concrete in your floor in your building. And if you're renting, that's on you. So you want to make sure you've got a high PSI rated concrete floor that can handle the lift that you're trying to put on it. Service and inspection. These are things that do need to be inspected and serviced. Mostly they're on an annual basis, but depending on what the manufacturer recommends, you want to follow those things. If they're hydraulic, you got to do hydraulic checks. If they are, mechanical, you still have to control the drives. You need to make sure that all your safety catches are in place. Once you put a vehicle up on a lift, you want to be able to lock it in so that even if whatever the method that locks it up there or lifts it up there is, whether it's a screw, a hydraulic ram, whatever it is, that thing, even if that apparatus fails, the vehicle is locked into place and it won't fall on someone or something when you're using it. So my thing with this is I like the scissor lifts. They get us up to about waist height with a vehicle. We can take wheels and tires off. That's really about all we really need. So again, my advice on a lift, don't get too crazy with it. All right, so I'm open for some questions if anybody has any. I can't read what's on the screen up there. I don't have my glasses. Help me out. Sheldon, if you're there, hit me up. Alejandro, hey, good to see you, buddy.
Yeah, no questions yet, Keith. Just a bunch of people saying hello. Alejandro, Ivan Campuzano, got to meet you at Detailing Success in Portland. Sounds cool.
Yep, we had a good time with that one.
Arpaz61. So, guys, if you are watching, make sure you ask questions as we go, and we'll hand them over to Keith. But for now, Keith, I'd say keep on going.
Okay, so what other equipment do we have in the shop? Well, over here on my right shoulder, we have built-in chemical delivery equipment. Hey, that's really cool. This is now starting to get into what I call efficiency equipment. The other things are infrastructure that you support yourself with. Lifts can be efficiency equipment. Everything there, if it's better or higher grade and more efficient than what you could use of a lower grade, it's obviously efficiency equipment. But now we're getting into getting rid of things like spray bottles and pressure sprayers. While I love my friends at IK and I highly recommend them, if I could go to built-in equipment that auto pumps out the product and delivers it to my hand and I can use it anytime, that's an efficiency method. So things to consider when you look at that equipment. Again, you're building it in. Are you going to have to leave it because it's now part of the building? The other thing, maintenance on that. Don't get too complicated with these things. You don't need to get crazy. That's a very, elegant, simple piece of equipment. It doesn't have a ton of intricacy to it, which means you can operate it, you can maintain it, you can clean it, you can do all the things you need to do to it at the operator level once it's built and installed. So nice and clean has always been my motto with this stuff. So look at those things because they do allow, for those of you using high volume or for those of you who are, say, maybe in a dealer environment where people buy product and you don't see it, it prevents what we call product leakage. Now, product leakage is not people just stealing your product. It's also things like bottles fall over, they break, chemical spills. It can be things as simple as overfilling or underfilling product. By that, I mean we're using the glug method to measure our chemical instead of actually proportioning it correctly. So looking at that kind of equipment really can speed up the process. If you've ever been in the middle of a job and you're using something like this and it runs out of product, now I got to stop, refill this, and start over with it. Whereas with those products, you really don't have that kind of a problem with equipment like that. So really a nice, setup. I do want to go back and revisit one topic, and that is airlines. So we talk a lot in our industry about, hey, you got to have an air compressor. And a lot of guys want to go to a big air compressor. And I really encourage that if it fits your shop model. Some things that go with that. Number one, never ever use PVC for your airlines. You always want to use copper or black pipe steel that are rated for what they're designed for. You can use high pressure hose if you want. Oh, that's kind of a spendy way. And as you see behind me, that's pipe that is sheathed in a nylon cover. It looks great, but it stays nice and straight. It looks clean. It looks tight. It's a good product. It's rated for that. It'll flex enough that if we get freezing weather, it won't burst. And that's the fear when you talk about pressure washer, and air compressor piping. Pressure washer piping. Copper won't do, in my opinion. It doesn't hold enough pressure unless you get really expensive, high-rated copper. My advice to you is always go with a rolled steel for your solid lines. And then flex couplings are a huge thing. So from your hard pipe that runs from your back room all the way out to where you're going to have your pressure washer bay, you want to have a flexible coupling to your pressure washer so that the vibration from that unit doesn't vibrate the piping loose or make an ungodly amount of noise, and it will. Same thing with an air compressor. Flexible coupling from the air compressor to the wall, and then go with hard piping. High pressure hydraulic hose is perfectly acceptable for a couple of feet of that. So just some kind of catch up things there. Finally, I want to talk about is vacuums. And this is kind of the Easter egg at the end of this. Vacuums are a huge component of what we do. We want to dry extract, if we can, every piece of carpet and fabric we work on. Introducing water to dry dirt just makes mud. So we want to remove as much dust and dry debris as possible whenever we clean a vehicle out. There are some stellar, and I'm standing next to one right now, stellar shop vac portable vacuum systems out there on the market today. And I am not going to kind of cast shade on those, but there are some really nice uprating vacuums that you can mount to the wall with long hoses that have lift. So when we talk about vacuums, key components to that are not how big your vacuum is. That's not what we're talking about. What we want is we want lift, and we want to know how many nozzles we can run off of it. So if we're doing a central vac system, we want to make sure that that is piped and set up so that we get the maximum volume of lift, which is going to be greater than what we can get from a portable unit at the point of use. So if you have a 20-foot vacuum hose, you want to make sure that your lift is in the 120 to 130 range minimum to make that a worthwhile add to your shop. Otherwise, you can get 120 out of a shop vac if it's a good quality one for much less expense. The reason why you go to a central vac or you go to a wall mount vacuum system is very simple. We beat the heck out of our shop vacs. They roll around, they get broken. They aren't super durable. And again, you replace them time after time. Over time, it's really much more cost effective to get a wall mount vacuum system that has more lift, more durability, sits off the floor and doesn't take the abuse and will last a lot longer. So with vacuums, it's really about what the lift is. If they say it's a 3-stage or a 2-stage vacuum motor, doesn't matter as much as long as your lift capability is what you want it to be at the point of use. So the nice thing with central vacuum systems are you can hook multiple hoses to a central vac unit. You can put drops wherever you want them strategically and use those at will. The negative is they are a little noisy. You do have to place the vacuum, its exhaust, in the same place as you're placing its suction. So in a space like I'm in right now, the turbine generator could be wherever you want it to be, but your vacuum nozzles are in here, so the exhaust for that thing has to be in here, just so we keep an even pressure differential and the vacuum works at its maximum effectiveness. That's really it for vacuums, other than I will say a central vacuum is going to eat a lot of power because the motor runs, it's a much bigger motor, it's a much higher horsepower motor. So that, again, the convenience, the effectiveness, the long-term lasting of that tool does also have some negatives to it, in that it is more expensive to maintain that unit as far as just daily use with a power bill. So stuff to consider. But if you're doing high volume, it's the only way to exist, is to have a central vacuum, to have chemical delivery equipment, and to have built-in pressure washer units. All three of those things together will bring you a higher level of efficiency than you could possibly have using the individual components of a, if you will, a consumer grade product. So with that, Sheldon, I'm kind of wrapped up here. And if anybody has any questions, I'm open.
Yeah, we did have a couple questions. First, back to the lifts. Alejandro is asking, would you recommend race ramps over a lift?
Again, it depends on your use rate. If you have a designated area and you're doing wheels every day consistently, heck no. Because race ramp, the vehicle's still sitting on the wheel. If you're working under the vehicle to detail and maintain it, and that's what your use for it is, then go with a race ramp. It's probably your most economical way to go. The problem I have a lot of times with race ramps is you get on a ramp, okay? Not all the time are those things bolted down. And while they don't move or slide real easily, I don't like stuff that isn't bolted down when I put 2,000 pounds or 4,000 pounds of weight above my head. I like stuff that's not going to move on its own. My preference there would be depending on the use. Here we have a set of scissor ramps over here, and they're great. But they also, once you bolt them to the floor, they're kind of there, which means if they're in the way and you're tripping on them, you're not using them every day, they almost can be as much of a nuisance or an inconvenience as they can be an efficiency factor. So if I were doing the occasional wheel and tire, I might look at a different option or portable potential stuff like that. But otherwise, I'm a lift guy.
A couple of things just came in on that. What are your thoughts on quick jacks, which I'm not familiar with, but someone else said they're on their purchase list?
Well, I don't know what they mean by quick jacks. If they mean like a 5-ton floor jack or something like that, again.
Sort of a lightweight pneumatic scissor lift.
Okay, yeah. So that's just a scissor lift to me. A quick jack is probably really considered more of a portable scissor jack system. And again, I just like stuff that doesn't move under, or doesn't have the potential to move under me. Now, again, we're putting 4,000 pounds on top of the thing. It's probably not going to slide around much. So I'd prefer that over a race ramp or using a floor jack. A quick jack's better than some other options. And again, that's a nice in-between fix for a guy who does some wheels, but doesn't do them all the time and has a very limited space.
Yeah. Could you use one of those mobile? I guess I'm not very familiar with them, but is that something you could take on the road?
You could use one of those mobile, but again, they're quick jacks. They hold a lot of weight. They aren't exactly light to move around, and you'd have to take them and, assemble, disassemble the setup. They're going to take some space in a van, and how you manage that could be a thing. If you've got a big old trailer you drag around, not a problem. If you got a Sprinter van, they might fit in pretty well. But if you're in a tight, van or smaller space, then they may not be something for you. But those would be the ones that are portable for a mobile guy. Yeah, gotcha. I'm still not a fan of those because now we start talking about surfaces that aren't level, uneven ground, unstable ground, gravel, that kind of stuff. Again, it's just the use. If it's just you and you're really competent, go for it. If you have employees, I might think twice about thinking about that.
Yeah, makes sense. Last one was someone asked, what's a wall mount vac you would recommend? Now, if you're not comfortable throwing out brands, that's fine. You can just kind of talk about specs you would look for, like you kind of talked about the lift already. But
so typically on those, there's a couple manufacturers out there. They have some that are garage level, and again, you want to go with a Pro Series version of that. They have some nice ones out there that are really affordable. They're $400-500, $600. I sell some myself, so if you're interested, I can certainly connect you to a nice one at a good price. Going with the consumer grade version of those, the concern there is not that the unit will wear out, but that when a component goes bad, there's less warranty coverage. So, and if you use it in a professional setting, there's no warranty coverage. So getting the professional series that costs a little bit more, 25% more, is the way to go. Capacity, these are still a bag, in a can vac. You're looking at a capacity on those of about 4 to 5 gallon size. The lift level on them is about 135 to 140 inches of lift. And the vacuum hose is a little bit smaller in diameter, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. But it'll provide a tremendous amount of lift and a lot of convenience.
All right. Well, I think we're about there. Keith, how do people get in touch with you if they want to ask you any more questions?
Well, we click one more slide. There you go. Detailplus.com is our website. Keith at detailplus.com is my email. My cell phone number is there, 503-547-5990. You can get a hold of me any of those ways. You can message me on Messenger. You can text me, call me, whatever it is. I'll tell you, it's a little harder for me to keep up with the Messenger and social media side of things. So regular phone calls and emails really work well for me.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for doing this today. Got some great responses here in the comments, so everyone's very thankful. Actually, I'll definitely be catching up with you in Kentucky for sure, and then hope to see you in Vegas in August.
Yeah, I look forward to that. And just a shout out to MTE. Thank you guys for picking up and putting on your education series. I think it's really cool that despite the setback of having consecutive events canceled, that you guys were able to still bring that education to our detailer community. And so thank you guys for doing that. Big shout out to the Rag Company and our team here. These guys have done a great job of supporting it and sponsoring it. So Jeff and Carolyn and Levi and the whole team, thank you guys for that. So great seeing everybody. Take care and be safe out there.
Yeah, well, thanks again, Keith, and thanks again, Rag Company, as you just said. Also, G Technique, Coach Me, PNS Detail, couldn't do it without you all. So I believe next week we have Mike Phillips coming up. Hope you guys will catch that. He's going to also be talking about some things in the shop on how to stay economical and keep everything running smooth. So until next week, I'm Sheldon Kay, show manager of MTE, and I will see you next Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern.